Well, I'll tell you something. I was last week with my friend David Sirota, who is the co-writer of Don't Look Up. Don't Look Up is an extremely popular movie. It's the most popular movie ever on Netflix about climate change. And I was talking with him about the film and the tremendous success of this movie. It's a great movie. And I hope that tomorrow morning we find out that they've been nominated for every Oscar that there is. I don't know if that'll happen. We'll see. I hope so. So I was saying to him, though, listen, your movie has created an enormous wave of awareness, but you're not doing the thing that we always do in the documentary world, which is we do an engagement, we call it an engagement campaign, right? With Gasland and Gasland Part 2 and How to Let Go of the World and Awake, we had these massive campaigns to go out and meet people. Gasland, we toured, those three movies, I toured to 500 cities in the United States, Europe, all over. And the reason why is the same reason why no one runs like a presidential campaign from their basement. You have to go out and shake hands and meet their children and learn their individual circumstances and get out there and get people to matriculate into the movement. And the best way to do that is you hit the road. You go on tour, you know what I mean? And you go to the front line. You go to the place where they're fighting the pipeline or fighting the fracking industry. And then you're there as the movie guy and everybody watches the movie. But the important part is what happens after the credits, right? Because awareness is awareness, but awareness doesn't change anything. So a lot of artists, it can change things. It adds up. A lot of artists think that their job is to move people from ignorance to awareness. But the activist's job is to move people from awareness to action, right? So it is our job as artists to collaborate with the organizers and to collaborate with the people who are going to bring people to action, right? So when we do that, when we put out a movie and it just goes on Netflix, it's like it goes on Netflix and the next thing you know is the person's watching the next movie on Netflix. And that's it. You know what I mean? And maybe they'll think about it, at some point in life, oh, I should do something about this. But if you put the movie out and then you tour and you make an event and people are together and they're in the same space and there are organizations there, then you build a movement. That's how we built the movement on fracking in Europe. We built the movement against fracking in the United States, town by town, town by town by town, one place, So you show the film. That's enormously gratifying to watch people learn all of that. But the better part of it and the more important part of it is you're working with the activists on the ground to give them the tools that they need to bring their rest of their town in. Because there's always like 10 people in the town that know what's up. You need everybody. So you create an event for that and you bring them together. So the role of the artist, is as a person who we cannot separate ourselves in the ecosystem of politics. We cannot just say, well, I'm just an artist, I just want to make my art, because, we're a part of a relationship with the rest of the world, right? And so in Hollywood, Leonardo DiCaprio, I don't know if he's going to go on a 500 city tour for Don't Look Up, you know what I mean? But he should. I think if he were to do that, you would see a lot of people show up and change. So that was my discussion with David Sirota, who was also a speechwriter for the Bernie campaign, right? Who I knew from the Bernie campaign. And, I said to him, look, let's get this tour going. Make it the Just Look Up tour. Let's make it happen. I can help you figure it out. Who you're going to work with? How do you make this happen? And he was like, you're so right. We haven't been thinking about this. You know what I mean? So what we have to do is not just make the art. I was working with this group of really rich people on creating a big a museum out of old coal plant in upstate New York. And they showed me the exhibition, and gorgeous. It was this giant ball of sun in the middle of this huge, long amphitheater, like hallway, big grand. and it was bright red, and you walked in there and you felt like you were like, oh my God, you were like in this weird Martian, and it was about climate change. It was about the warming of the earth, and you felt it. And I said, well, what are the organizations you partnered with for this exhibition? And they said, what do you mean? And I was like, you must have heard anti-climate change organizations, so that when people came to this exhibit and they felt this thing, that they had something to do with all that emotion and someplace to go with it. Did you partner with Sierra Club or 350, any of the climate change organizations? And they looked at me like I was like I had just thought of something completely insane and radical. I'm like, you guys spent millions of dollars on these exhibits, and then you don't do, that's as far as it goes? Like, what's the deal? So as artists, we always have to think about how do we make ourselves most open to that? And for me, I'm an activist also, right? So I go out and give speeches and tour with Bernie Sanders, and that is something very, very familiar to me, right? Throughout my whole life. But as an artist, it's my job to make sure that I'm handing over the work to people who are really going to do something, rather than just let it be a commercial success or on TV or whatever. You know what I mean? Because we're way past the time when awareness is going to be enough. Awareness is not enough. I think actually at the moment, everybody's pretty fucking well aware. Everybody knows things are bad. There's a group of people that are just going to deny it. That 30% of people, the authoritarians, the fascists, the Nazis, the ones who are going to be anti-vaxxers, the ones that are going to be those people, don't think about those people. But that's probably about 30% of your population. Everywhere you go, right, are going to be those types of folks. We have more numbers, but we have to be in the streets. We have to be organizing. We cannot just assume that because we know the truth that it's actually going to be better, right? We have to work on the betterment. So what I always say about this is, movies are a certain way of doing things, but that's not what creates political change. Movements create political change. So movements are, in many ways, movies, culture, art, music, that's what a movement is made of. But the movement is what has to be the real thrust, because movements are what create change. Movies can be part of movements, but the movement is where you have to push. And that's the tool that we know how to create change in the world. I think there's a lot of things that contribute to that. I can only speak really from the United States angle in terms of this, but certainly in the United States, people are extremely stressed out. The minimum wage has not risen in 14 years, something like this. And the prices of everything have gone up. So many people have 2 and 3 jobs. Just the level of stress. And then, of course, there's student debt and medical debt. And, people are working harder than I've ever seen, and for less and less. So time is a big issue. And that means that everyday crises like poverty, everyday crises like, can my kid get to a doctor, or can they go to school, COVID, all of these things are adding up in people's lives. So they have to prioritize. But I also think that there's an issue of proximity, right? We have a great proximity to the internet, to movies. We don't always have proximity to the activist world. You know what I mean? Like we don't always have that activist world be accessible enough, right? So what emergency is going to make you miss your kid's Thursday night soccer game or whatever? Fracking was that, because they were afraid that the well was going to be right across their fence line and poison their house, poison their children. So this became a huge priority. We're seeing more and more that America is a nation where movements are the only thing that we have to push against the oligarchy. And that means labor union strikes. That means the Black Lives Matter movement. That means, the fight against fracking, the climate movement, the anti-war movement, the women's movement, the LGBTQ movement. People have to have proximity to organizing. So that doesn't always happen, and I also think that right now, I do believe that social media is pulling us apart. It's pulling the fabric of society to the extremes, to the point to which we don't get together, we don't talk as much. COVID has been really tough. One of the things that there was one campaign, which was Bernie Sanders' campaign, which was the campaign of the movements. The movements really got behind, because he is a movement person. You have pictures of him getting arrested for civil rights, and COVID came about at the time when that was supposed to be a very strong movement. I was supposed to be touring all of New York and Pennsylvania talking about the Green New Deal, and couldn't do it because everybody had to go home and sit inside. So I created that TV program, Staying Home with Josh Fox, where I talked to all of these people about the Green New Deal. And we did 200 episodes, but it's very different than actually being out there. So I think hopefully between the vaccines and Omicron variant, we're going to start to see COVID numbers drop. I really hope. And I really have high hopes that this summer will be a moment where a lot of movements sort of resurge, and become stronger, and that people can go outside and do things. That's one of my plans, to tour like crazy outside, take the movies outside, tour with speaking and with bands and with the banjo, and do a lot of outside events so that people feel that there's like a life back, with us. Climate despair is another huge problem. It's extremely difficult. But I did a workshop in Mexico City recently on climate despair. And the workshop sort of went like this. There were a lot of young people. It was probably college age or high school even. And I said, 200 people were there. I said, so tell me about your climate anxiety. What are you afraid of? And people raised their hands and they said, I can't think about this, and this bothers me, and floods and fires and plastics, and I'm overwhelmed by this aspect. And I mean, people were really expressing their concerns, and they felt terrible. It was scary to listen to them. It was very emotional. And they said, all right, who's got a local problem that they really are working on? Like, tell me one of your local battles. And about 7 or 8 people put their hands up. Well, this is a problem that I'm seeing here at this recycling place, and I want to work on these, climate gentrification here. And I said, all right, to the 200 people, I said, those 7 people, each of you give a 2-minute pitch as to why someone should help you with what you're working on. And they stood up on the chairs, and they gave their 2-minute pitches. And I said, all right, go to one of the people. And we broke the whole thing up. And I said, all right, now you have to design an action based on, just come up in the next 10 minutes, come up with one action, that they could do to advance that cause. And sure enough, they all started working and talking to each other, and they started to make friends, and at the end of it, it wasn't each individual person like in this big audience, but 6 or 7 of these groups. And they had, after 2 hours, a plan to meet again and a plan to do an action. And I went around and I said, so how many of you feel despair about the climate right now? And they were like, it's gone. They felt better. I said, how many of you feel better? And they felt better. The key to it is working with other people. And currently, we have a lot of things that are dividing us, that make it harder to work with other people. Obviously, COVID, Zoom, the internet has become more and more normalized. We see a lot of people walk down the street doing this. You know what I mean? Looking at Instagram or whatever. That's making it harder for us to interact, and a whole generation has less of ability to interact because they're so used to looking at the phone. Thankfully, I I don't have that problem. But also I think that when you see social media becoming so divisive, and when we see our leaders in our movements love to fight internally also. Those internal fights are causing lack of progress because you're always getting somebody to tear somebody else down and somebody else to tear somebody else down. And then that becomes like a way that we lose momentum, we lose the ability for us to do that. So that's another way that we can't come together. So there's, it's a team sport. Climate action is a team sport. We need to work together. And I used to always say, when I was doing How to Let Go of the World and Love All the Things Climate Can't Change, the tour for that film, I said, listen, how do you know you're working on the climate problem? Is you've left your house. That's the first step. If you're doing it just clicking, you're not doing a lot. You have to leave your house. And there are still ways we can do that. You know what I mean? Even with COVID, we can get together wearing masks. We know they work. You know what I mean? These masks are very, very good. And you can say, I can wear this mask. If somebody else is wearing this mask, the N95 mask, and I'm wearing the N95 mask, it takes 12 hours for us to get COVID from each other. If I'm wearing the mask and somebody else is not wearing the mask, it takes 3 hours for me to get it, right? So we know if we're all wearing the mask, we can hang out. It sucks because you can't see people's faces, and you feel like confined after a while. But you can at least have a 2-hour meeting or a 3-hour meeting, and know that you're safe, and know that you're getting things done. And frankly, we have no choice because we're way out of time. So we have to come together to do those things. And I think the obstacles are anything that makes us. And I'll say one other thing about this. It's hard to work together. Agreements are hard. False agreements are easy, but they'll backfire. It takes a great deal of endurance to work with other people, and a huge amount of generosity and a huge amount of forgiveness. It's difficult to do. It's not easy. Texting is easy. Posting things is easy. Slamming people with bad comments is easy. But working with other people, it takes a lot of energy and it takes a lot of intensity. It takes a lot of commitment, and yet it can also be the most rewarding thing that there is. So we have to understand that it's worth trying to do that. But it's so even if you're in the ideal circumstances, it's hard to work with other people. But there's no other choice. We have to find ways of doing that. And I think there's a lot within Western civilization, which is not helpful. If you look at to the indigenous world and the way that that system is much more democratic, much less individualistic, much less about fighting with each other all the time. In some ways, there are great inspirations that are coming from the indigenous world. That's why the Standing Rock uprising, Standing Rock was so important, and that's why looking to indigenous populations and indigenous people in terms of how they're organizing their societies and structuring them needs to be a key part of that organizing, I think. I'm making 4 movies at once right now, which is crazy. I'm making a film about climate migration and climate displacement. So I've been traveling around to a lot of disaster areas, the fires, the floods, the hurricanes, and meeting with the people who've lost their homes and talking about how do we model a different response. And that response is about bringing people together. Lo and behold, the climate movement has not been talking enough about climate refugees, climate displaced people who, we know hundreds of millions of people will be displaced. Hundreds of millions, not in the next 10 or 20 years. This is going to be a migration like we've never seen on the planet Earth. People will have to move out of the flood zones, the fire zones, the smoke zones, the earthquakes, the volcanoes. And so while we haven't been thinking about this, the other side has been. And their response is to build walls and prisons everywhere. We have walls on the Mexican border, walls in between Bangladesh and India, so those people cannot get across. And the response has been walls and incarceration, homelessness, and militarization. Well, this is crazy. You cannot incarcerate 100 million, 200 million, 300 million people. You cannot. That's a war. That's literally a war. There's no way to do it. So when you think about the future being, huge amounts of migration, maybe 1 billion people, 1 out of every 10 people, let's say, has to move. You're either going to be one of those people who's fleeing or one of the people who are receiving. Fundamentally, before colonialism, before contact in the Americas, freedom of mobility was a fundamental right of people. If you wanted to walk from the Amazon to Wyoming, you could do it. People were not going to tell you you couldn't go to this place or that place or the other place. The borders that we have erected between nations, the borders that we are erecting between neighborhoods, it's as difficult to go from the poor neighborhood in New Orleans in your lifetime to the rich neighborhood, if you're poor and black and brown, to go to the rich white neighborhood, as it is to get from Mexico to the United States or Guatemala to the United States, because those borders exist everywhere, not just between nations. And those borders are enforced. They're enforced by the police in the same way that they're enforced by the border guards, right? The whole notion of what is a borderline, what is property, who owns what, this notion of being encapsulated and confined, of being enclosed, is going to start to erode. Mm-hmm. Now that can either be a Mad Max, bloody gun battle situation, or we can decide to share with each other. And so what I'm trying to do with this new film is model that sharing, bring all those climate displaced people together. I think of it as a Shakespearean comedy where the lovers have been tossed out into the wilderness and there's a political problem that's pushed them out there. And at the end, everybody gets married. And at the end, there's music and food and celebration. And because we should be celebrating each other's cultures, the difference in culture, or the celebration is such a huge part of life on the planet. We celebrate the different forms of music that we have, the different forms of food that we have. We must start to celebrate each other and take care of each other. Because the climate problem is way, way worse if we make it worse, right? That was what How to Let Go of the World was about. That movie was about how our value system right now is competition, greed, capitalism, racism, violence. If that's our value system going forward, nowhere is safe. So, I'm interested in looking at that. I made a film called The Edge of Nature, where I explore what the idea of nature is. Is there such a thing as nature? So The Edge of Nature is about me living in a one-room cabin alone in the woods during the first 10 months of coronavirus and exploring what is nature. The whole idea of nature is something that separates human beings from the land. I'm working on a film about a whistleblower named Rebecca Jones, who blew the whistle on COVID. And we're having a very hard time finding financing for that because people are scared of making anything quote unquote political. And I'm working on another film about how the United States has opened up the wolf hunts. Again, they're hunting gray wolf, which was protected for 30 years. And that's another film about the culture clash. Some people want to kill the wolves. Indigenous people want to protect them. So I'm working on a crazy amount of documentaries this year. But after that, I want to get back to my work as a narrative filmmaker. narrative work. And so I'm developing 3 new film scripts right now that I'm really, really hoping. That's why I was meeting with David to talk about narrative work, because I do think this is a time where we need creativity, we need imagination, we need inspiration. People are overwhelmed by negative things, people are overwhelmed by facts, and they can drag us down. So we need to have creativity, imagination, inspiration. We need to have, great drama and great stories. And I'm really interested to see if some of those stories can be told, not just through the documentary, but going back to where I come from, which is the narrative world. So we'll see. I'm hoping to finish these 4 documentaries this year, and then go wholeheartedly back into the world of art, at least for a little while. But I'm also going to be touring and playing the banjo. I'm touring I'm doing a new type of touring presentation where I narrate the film that's behind me and play music at the same time. Some of that you can see. It was at this conference called What Design Can Do. There was a conference that was in Mexico City. So I'm taking a page from the book of Pete Seeger. Pete Seeger, my hero, this folk musician, the socialist, the communist, whatever you want to call him, who always fought for the unions, who always fought for the people. Pete Seeger in 1952 was blacklisted because they called him a communist. And he said, well, I mean, maybe I'm a communist. I really just like the American Indians because they shared everything. So that's where I'm coming from. You know what I mean? He didn't want to talk about Karl Marx or Lenin. He wanted to talk about, the Iroquois and the Lakota and the Navajo. That's what to him was communism, right? So he said, you have no right to ask me that question. And he was blacklisted for 16 years. For 16 years, until 1968, he could not get back on television. And he could not perform in big halls. So what did he do? He went town to town. He went to colleges. And he sang his songs. And he talked to young people. And that was probably more effective in the long run than any amount of going on the Ed Sullivan Show or whatever. Do you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So for me, it is increasingly difficult to get my films on television. I could not get The Truth Has Changed on television. I couldn't. It was commissioned by Sheila Nevins at HBO, the guru of documentary of all time, who was fired by HBO when AT&T bought HBO, the big mega phone company. Conservative companies are taking over our media spaces. It will be harder for me to get The Edge of Nature on television. I don't know if I will be able to. The Truth Has Changed. I'm not sure I'll be able to get it on television ever. You know what I mean? The Climate Displacement Project, thank God, is with HBO, who still are very much interested in doing the work I'm doing, thank God. I hope that stays that way. The Year of the Wolf Project is with BBC, but we don't have major distribution yet. So it's getting harder and harder to get. I'm not seen on MSNBC or CNN as much at all anymore because those places will not handle the type of things that I have to say. Mm-hmm. So there is a sort of partial blacklist happening among political ideas in America. And so I'm going to be touring. I'm going to tour regionally. I'm going to tour wherever I can tour. I would love to come to Serbia at some point if there's ever a chance. But I do think that I have to do out on the road and play music for people. Bring the big, beautiful show, but also to do that in order for us to organize place to place to place. So, it's that's why I'm pretty busy trying to finish these movies because I want to, I want to move back into narrative, and I also think that from the performance side of things, The Truth Has Changed taught me a lot doing this one-man show about how performance can also be like the speeches that I'm asked to go give, right? Like I'm asked to go give a speech on climate change. No, let's make it a performance. Let's make it with music and poetry and film, instead of it just being like well, I'm here to talk to you about this today. You know what I mean? Like not that I ever speak like that anyway, but you know what I'm trying to say? Like we've got to get people inspired from the heart. And that's what I'm trying to do, is integrate that. I'm happy to send you a clip of that if you're interested in that new form that I'm putting out right now. So yeah, that's what's up. And I have to say that I keep doing this because I keep feeling, number one, the necessity of it, but also just the incredible inspiration. You know, this is life on the planet Earth right now. People are dealing with hardship, real hardship. I mean, interviewing people who've lost their homes in the fires, lost friends in the fires, their dogs, were killed, their friends were killed, being with those people at this moment and watching how they are creating the future rather than listening to TV or listening to Joe Biden, or Vladimir Putin for that matter. Rather than listening to that, it helps me enormously to listen to what the people are doing in the streets and what they're doing to rebuild their lives and how they are trying to work together. So once again, just to say, the only place that will be safe, that is safe from the climate crisis, is also the place where you are most effective in fighting it. So anyway, that's where I'm going to be. I'm really hoping though that these films will get finished. I'll find a way to finish them, and that they'll get out, and that the world of imagination after that is what I'm going to explore. Still, with respect to the climate crisis, these are still movies on climate change. They're just, not going to be documentaries.